Hello and welcome to the lecture. I'm guessing that none of you did the pre-assignment of downloading the programs we need. So first let's go and do that. Spend 5 minutes doing that. Let's go to sims4studio.com and follow the instructions on screen to get to the actual download file. There are two versions of the program. There's a Stars version and there's Aurora's version. We will be using Stars version because it's compatible all the way up to Blender version 5. You will get some warnings doing this because it's a mod file, but you can safely ignore those. It's a program that has been used in the Sims 4 community for ages, so we're just gonna download this. The file is too big for Google Disk to search through it, but just click download anyway. And once we have downloaded the program, we can open the Sims 4 Studio. It's just gonna take a while to unpack, but once it has, we can add a creator name. This can be your real name or your Sims name, that's up to you. Next, although you should already have this, we can go to EA or Steam to download the Sims 4. Just search for the Sims 4 in the browse section and you should find it. The base game is free, although extra packs are paid, but for this you will only need the base game. But of course, if you have other packs, that's fine too. On Steam, you can just go to Steam Store and then search for The Sims 4 and you will find the game. And as you can see, it is free to play. Next, we will download Blender. You can just ignore the donation thing and click remind me later. And then you can go to download and then you can just hit download Blender to download the latest version. If you are experiencing issues, it might be beneficial to roll back the Blender version, but the Sims 4 Studio version we downloaded should be compatible with the latest version, but make sure that you have a version that is compatible with the version you downloaded, which you can see on the Sims 4 forum where we downloaded it from. Lastly, we will download this free editing software called Krita, which will let us modify the textures and change colors and use various effects on the texture files. This is also a free software. You can also, of course, use other version if you want to. I will be using Clip Studio Paint, but there are also IBIS Paint or whatever software you feel most comfortable with. So we're just gonna hit download here and download the Windows installer because I'm on Windows. Of course, if you are on Mac, you would want to download the Mac installer. And there is also a Linux version. Once we have downloaded our necessary programs, we can go back to the Sims 4 Studio. As you can see, we have CAS, Object, Build, and Animation. Today we will be focusing on Object because that is where you make your furniture. Now let's go to Tools and then Browse in-game content. And then objects. Now you can see a list of the game's object files and or furniture. So we can click on one, and as you can see, we can see it in the 3D view, and we can see all the swatches it has. Then we can add new swatches, we can remove swatches, and we also have a warehouse button, which just is a list of all the files. We're not gonna care too much about that today, but we have the texture, we have mesh, and we have different categories we can put in. In the 3D view, we can also take on and off the grid lines but they are useful to see where the floor is. Now here is the texture. As you can see, we have a diffuse map, which is like the base color, and then you have a cube E and V map, which is the light reflection. And then you have the normal map, which shows any scratches and unevenness to the surface of the object. And then you have the spec map, which shows the reflectivity of the object, so the shininess of the wood and the reflections of the velvet. And then lastly, we have the dirt overlay. As you probably know, The Sims has a function where things can catch fire, and this is the effect that would then be laid over to illustrate that it has caught fire. Next, let's go to the Mesh tab, which shows the shape of the object and the object's physical dimensions and tells the computer the physical shape of the project, while the texture is like paint on it. And here you can see the vertices and poly count. Now we will try to keep this down, because if this is too high, the model will not load properly in game and it will lag, because this basically means the size of it. And in Blender you will soon see that I will refer back to what vertices is, but it's essentially the squares or triangles. And here you can see there are several models of the object as well, based on how far away you are from the object and how much shadow is on there. We will only make one today, but you will see then that when you zoom out, it changes back to a default one. So if you want to have your object still show on all of these points, you will need to upload the mesh to all of them. And here you can see we have different tags, so we can pick the color and we can pick the category. So we can pick that it's a dark brown chair. This is in Norwegian because my program is in Norwegian. But yeah, here's plenty of categories, so you can find it easily in game. We will use those when you guys make your objects. You can check the ones that you want to use. Now, when you guys make your object, I want you to pick something that is similar to whatever you are making. So if you're making a table, you must pick a table. That is because we are using the table template later on in Blender. We need to refer to size and, item slots. Like in game, you can put plates on the table. So we need that. Now here are the textures on the table. As you can see, it's basically the same ones. We also have a spec mask, a spec map, and a dirt overlay that is white. This is snow because this is an outside object, while the snow mask decides where the snow will go, and the spec map for the snow decides how reflective the snow is gonna be. Now for this object, you can see it has quite a few less vertices. You should probably aim for less than 1,000 vertices, and how much more, that depends on the look of the object. You know, the less polygons an object have, the more like clunky it looks, because it has less data. You can get around vertices by using something that is called shade smooth or subdivision surface. We will get back to that later. Now let's look at a different object. So this is a object that's placed on top of a table, so it doesn't have a slot of its own. That is a flower object. As you can see, when we change the swatches here, the color of the flower changes. Otherwise, it's the same maps that we have seen before, and a similar amount of vertices and polygons to the table. This one also has its tags. Now we are going to add a new swatch to this chair, so let's go and download the texture map so that we can use that and edit it. So we're just gonna export that as a PNG image, just save it wherever you want. Name it something that makes you remember it. And I'm just gonna call this chair texture. And then we're gonna go and we're gonna open that in our drawing program. Now for this demonstration I will be using Clip Studio, so we go to File and Export Singular and then hit PNG because our image is a PNG. We can also go to Import and then Image and then pick our PNG from there. So here it is. Now it's important that the file size stays exactly divisible or like to the power of 2, because computers work, as you know, in binary language. So it has to be exactly 1024 pixels, 512 pixels, or something else that is to the power of 2. Do not make the mistake I am about to make, where I accidentally make the, the picture the wrong size. That is very important. Now that we have resized our image to the correct size, we can start to edit it. So I want to change this pillow, so in order to make sure my edits stay inside the pillow, I'm gonna select just this part, so that when I draw outside the selection, it will not appear. You can also um, add a mask to this, so that you are forced to stay within the lines and can still select things, but I'm just gonna make a small edit, so I'm just gonna do it in like this, and I'm gonna select yellow from the color wheel, and I use a pen tool to draw a heart. Just a small little edit. There is a clause in the assessment task you have been given that I want you to base your objects on actual interior processes and products and materials. So if you want to, you can go to a fabric site and note the price per meter of fabric, and you can take a picture of this fabric and you can implement it in your file. So I just copied the image and I included it in the file. Now if we just hit transform, we can adjust it to fit inside our pillow on the original texture. We can also reorder the layers so that the heart we drew earlier comes on top of the image. The resizing didn't quite work, so I decided to hit invert selection so that square became inverted, and then I hit delete, and then I just inverted the selection again to go back to selecting the pillow. You can also add effects with the layer effects, such as right now it's set to normal, but there are also overlay, which preserves some transparency, and there's screen, which also is kind of, it gives you a bit more color and a bit less detail from the layer underneath it. And you can also erase the edges if you want to, these rounded edges, like in the original pillow. You can select the eraser tool, or you can use the select tool to just mark the area you want gone and then just hit delete. Previously, we have made all edits on separate layers and haven't actually messed with the original texture, but now I want to use the hue saturation tool to change the actual texture, so I'm going to duplicate it so that it stays the same even if we make edits, so that we can go back and change it. And we're going to do that by right-clicking our layer and hitting duplicate layer. Next, we're gonna add some effects to the layer. Now this is an object layer, so first we're gonna right click and hit rasterize in order to make it a rasterized layer so that we can edit it. Next we're gonna go to edit and then hue saturation contrast slider, and then we're gonna fiddle with that until we get the result we want. The difference between an object layer and a rasterized layer is that the rasterized layer stores the information in the form of pixels, while the object layer stores it in the form of vectors, so it's easily scalable without losing data. This isn't quite a vector layer, but it works as um, in a similar way. Now that we are done with the texture editing, we can go to File, Export Single Layer, and then PNG, and then we can name it whatever we want. When we export it, it is important that when the PNG confirmation window comes up, that we have the right alpha settings so that the thing can show up in game, and that we have the correct dimension to the power of 2 so that our computer can read the file. With the file saved, we can go back to the Sims4 Studio, and then we can hit standard recolor, make sure that's selected, and then hit object. And then we can find the original object that we edited, and we can now it will create a new package because we're making a new mod file, so just name it whatever you want, and then hit next. Here is the name and description and the price. If you made the thing based on an actual fabric, this is where I want you to update the price to realistic numbers. The game has interior styled categories, so here you can see the style is Queen Anne. You can update this to what you want, and then tooltip tags is where you'll find it in the game, so you should also update this to where you want to find it. Now if we go to texture, and you can see you can upload a catalog thumbnail, you can change the swatch. We're gonna add a new swatch. This is swatch 32, which we will be using, and we can change the color of the thumbnail, and we're just going to import here under texture, and then we're gonna take out a texture that we changed. If I can find out where I saved it. Now we just hit open after selecting the image, and as you can see, our little heart appears on the chair in the Sims 4 Studio. Then we can hit save to save our creation to the package so that we can import it into the game. Now this translation isn't very good, but we'll ignore that. And now we can find the sims4 folder and electronic arts. Usually this is under documents, and then it's called electronic arts. Then the sims4, and then you'll see the mods folder, which is where we want to put our file. After we have saved our file to the correct folder, we can then open the sims4 game. Now, you might have to enable mods from within the sims folder. As you can see, I have mods enabled. The mods appear there if they are enabled. If you want to enable mods, hit escape, then game option, then other, and then there's a tick mark next to enable custom content and mods. Then just hit save and save and quit, and you might have to relaunch the game once again. Once we have done that, we can either resume game, load game, new game. We just need a game so that we can see our object. I'm gonna hit load game because I have an existing game open. Then we're gonna hit the build mode icon, so we enter build view, and then we're gonna hit the chair so that we can find our chair under living chairs. You can also find it here under comfort, maybe, yes. That's our chair. Let's see if we can find it. There it is. You see it has a wrench on it because it has been modified. And then we just need to put it in the game and change the color to our updated swatch. You can do this by clicking R or this card icon on top, not the pick icon, and then you can hit the swatch. Now if your item shows up like this, it may be because you moved your item and then edited it again, then it saved it to a different location, so make sure you have the absolute newest version in your game. In my case, this was because I did not have the correct texture dimension, so make sure your texture has the correct power of 2 dimensions. Because of this, I went back to the Sims 4 studio and added the swatch again. This time I changed the thumbnail colors, and then I updated the texture with the correct 1024 512 dimension picture, so that the computer is actually able to read it. Then once you're done, just hit save and remember to remove it back into the mod folder. Now, as you can see, once we have fixed those two issues, it appears in-game. Now I want you to take staging photos. We can use the existing Sims furniture, like for example this table, so I can test the functionality. We're just gonna move this way a bit and put this table down, and then we're gonna ask our sim to come sit, which he does. Now if we press C, we can take a screenshot. This is where the lecture would pause and you would do the task. Recreate object you chose to create for this lecture in the homework I gave you for today, and do the texture editing. After that, we are back in Blender. This is a simple chair we're gonna create today. Replace the right click with the middle mouse button, and the navigation is pretty similar to The Sims. Just scroll to zoom in and out. Hold scroll wheel and drag your mouse back and forth to rotate, and hold scroll wheel and control and drag your mouse back and forth to pan the view. Now you can either hit tab or you can go to the right on it and hit object mode. We're gonna go to mesh and we're gonna make a cube. Once we have that, we're gonna select it and hit G or the movement icon to move it away from our chair. This will be the base of our new chair. Once we're happy with its position, we will go back to edit mode either by pressing tab or hitting this button up here, and then we can choose if we want to edit the edges, the vertices, or the faces. First we're gonna go over some commands. It's E to extrude, G to move, S to scale, R to rotate. Now I'm just selecting the faces and pressing E to pull them up and trying to make the basic frame of our chair. It is just the same procedure, I'm just controlling the camera around, and I'm selecting the face I want to drag out like this. If I'm unhappy, I can hit Control Z to undo what I have done. If I change my mind and want it back, I can hit Control Y. And I'm just doing the same thing. I'm hitting E on the faces and making it as chair-like as possible. It does not have to be perfect. This is just the first lecture of Blender, so we want it to be as simple as possible. Oh, and if you hit G while having face select mode active, you will only move the face, so make sure you have object mode selected if you want to move the entire object. Next, here's a demonstration of rotate. If you just select the object and press R, as you can see, you can rotate it like this. And again, it is S to scale, so if you scale, then move your mouse back and forth, you can resize the object like this. Now either press tab or go to the menu and change it back to edit mode. If I select the faces I want by holding shift and clicking on them, I can hit F and that will fill the entire surface like this with the face. Hit Ctrl R to make loop cuts, which loop around the object. It will go in the direction indicated by the yellow line, and this will add more geometry to the piece. Geometry refers to the amount of faces and vertices on the object, and it dictates how much detail there is to it. Once I have all four legs, I'm doing the same for the back of the chair. I'm leaving the seat open because I want to add the cushion separately later. To add the cushion, hit add and then a cube, and then just hit G to move it to where we want it. Make sure to press tab and go back to object mode before you do this. Once you have your object where you want it, hit S or select the scaling tool to scale it to the size you want it so that it fits the chair. Once you have it where you want it, you can then right click and then shade smooth to make the surface a bit smoother. Shade smooth allows us to simulate a more rounded surface without adding extra geometry to it. As you can see, when we use it on the chair, it creates this effect. We can also go to modifiers, and then we can go to generate and then subdivision surface to create this roundness. Now if we have more geometry, it will have this more soft look, but because this is square, it just turns it round, because that's what it does. And we can also adjust the levels and the render of each of these. And this is how it looks on the chair. As you can see, more levels means smoother, less means more square. There's also a bunch of other effects, even physics, and lots of things you can play with. There's solidify, which makes things bigger, and then there's clothing modifier, so it acts like fabric. There's a lot of things you can mess with here. Now that we are done with our chair, let's do some texture editing. We go to the texture paint tab, and as you can see, we have our white and pink chair here, and on the side is the UV map. Oops. Now I hid it from you, but that was the dice looking square thing. We will come back to it. Now we select the object we want to modify, and then we go to the globe icon to find our materials, and then we hit new to make a new material, and then under base color we hit the yellow dot and select image texture, and then we can either open an existing texture or we can add our own new texture. Now our UV map is back into view. This is the unwrapped pillow. As you can see, it's formed like a dice because it is a cube shape. So if I want, I can draw here directly on this, or I can draw directly on the chair itself. Now if I just go here and I change the lightness, as you can see the color wheel appears, so I can just select the color, and then I can either use the bucket tool or this pen in order to add detail to this image. Well, now first I do have to create a PNG, and this will not be saved unless you save it manually. So make sure that you always save your images when working in Blender. Now, as you can see, I realized that I was drawing my heart on the wrong face. If you go to UV unwrapping and you select the face, you can tell where it is on the mesh, but we will get to that later. Oh, not the mesh, the texture, of course. If the texture you are drawing is not appearing on the model, it might be because you have the wrong image file on the side. Now, if you want to just change the color, you can also just change the base color like I'm doing here, and adjust the different effect sliders like metallic, roughness, and so on. And if I want to see what my material will look like on different shapes, I can change that in this menu here. Now, another method to add texture is we can use nodes. We can use existing textures, for example, from this website called Polyheaven. If I want to find the wood texture, I'm just gonna scroll down and hit texture, and then I'm gonna scroll until I see wood texture. They have a lot of different textures here that you can use in your product. I just want a simple one that doesn't look like a floor. Let's see if I can find something. Now once you have found the texture you like, you can just hit download and it will come with all the different things you may need to create a texture, some of which you may recognize from when we looked at the different textures that exist in the Sims 4 Studio, such as the diffuse map, the spec map, and so on. The normal map, you know the drill. Alternatively, you can go to textures.com, which also has a lot of different textures you can use, but I'm gonna use Polyhaven today. Back under shading, remember the nodes. When you create a new material, you get these two nodes automatically. So now we just want to take the files we download. You may need to unzip your files, but otherwise they should be downloaded. We can find them here among the folders. Now as I have found the files, I can just drag them over here to view them. Now before we can do anything else, we will need to UV unwrap the mesh so that the image will know where to go. Next, head to UV editing so that we can edit the UV map. So just go to edit mode in order to select all the edges, and we're gonna select everything. And then we are going to right click and then hit UV unwrap. Now there's many methods of unwrapping. For this project, I think I used smart UV unwrapping, but I believe I tried several of them in order to find which one is best, and I recommend you do the same. Once it has been unwrapped, it appears like this as small squares on the texture, so now it knows where it is gonna go. If you remember the dice shape from earlier, this is what we will be doing. We will essentially be laying it flat. As you know, a cube, once unfolded, turns into a dice cross. To me, I am also always thinking about the dice because I have made dice from paper before. Um, you can also think about this like fabric once it's in pieces before you make clothing or before you make anything. It That's what it looks like flat. So we're going to do that so that it knows where to go. There was a lot of trial and error done, especially on the node stage, because when I tried to bake this, unfortunately it turned black, and I believe that is because we had two textures and it wasn't sure which ones to use. Now I tried to use the correct nodes, but eventually I just had to give up, and I ended up doing it manually. Here is how angle-based unwrapping looks in comparison. As you can see it soon, it is much narrower and kind of gathered in the corner. But you can still move this around like usual by pressing G and R to rotate, S to scale, you know the drill. And as you can see what it looks like on as well, there is overlap, which means that some places won't actually get the texture. So let's be careful of that. I did the same thing with the cushion. I went to the Polyhaven website and I found the cushion texture I liked. To add the texture to Blender, we go to shading and then we find the material we are going to add it to. And I'm making a new material here to show that this is what you get when you make a new material. Now I go to where I'm supposed to be and I hit texture and then texture add, and then image texture, which gives this brown windows that you can see I have several of. I have one for each map. I have one for the diffuse map, one for the normal map, and every map that I needed for that texture. And I plugged them in as indicated, so if there was one called metallic, I plugged it into metallic, and if there was one called roughness, I plugged it into roughness. I believe that I probably plugged the normal map into roughness. Now that we have our textures the way we want them, we want to take the original mesh we will be using from the Sims 4 studio. So we're gonna browse objects and we're gonna find the exact mesh we want to download. Now, it's probably safer to not do this via browsing, but instead we create 3D mesh so that you don't accidentally overwrite any game files. I don't know if this is what I did, but at some point I lost progress, but I was able to. It got back to normal after I restarted my PC, and I'm suspecting this might be why. Fortunately, this part of the footage was deleted, but I am just pressing the export button like how we did with the texture, but on the mesh. Back in the Blender file, we will need to save this and export it either as FBX or OBG. That is completely up to you. I used FBX by habit, but most of the tutorial I watched for this used OBG. So we're gonna do that, and then we're gonna open the mesh we just made, or not made, exported, and then we're gonna add our FBX or OBG file by going to File and then Import. Now we're gonna try to line our mesh up with the Sims mesh. As you can see, our mesh is huge, but we'll try to make it the same size, because if it's a different size, not only will it look huge in game, your sim will also sit on it weird because it's not lining up with the proper slots. So we're gonna do that. We're gonna use G to move it, S to scale, you know the drill. If we want it to line up, we can actually select our object and then hit right click, and then we can go to snap and then selection to cursor. Snap, I said. And then it's just lining it up. Once we are happy with how it lines up, we are going to move the Sims chair away, and then we're gonna select our chair first, and then we're gonna select the Sims chair, and then we're gonna right click and hit join, which is what I've done here. Then we're going to delete all the vertices of the Sims 4 chair. Now after we have joined the files, you can see that the texture didn't take well to that. That's because the UV got upset, so we're gonna have to redo the UV map. Back in shading, we're going to go to the render tab. It's the camera-like icon, and then we're going to select cycles instead of EEV at the engine, and then we're gonna hit bake. Unfortunately, every time I did this, it did not work out, so instead I decided to do it manually. So I'm instead going to copy this wood texture and velvet texture, and I'm gonna remake it from scratch so that I have both textures on one tab, because the UVs on this just does not cooperate with the base. I'm just gonna find the files with my textures, and I'm actually gonna import the entire folders because I want to keep as much as I can of the texture, because I'm gonna have to do this manually. I'm gonna use the overlay, the screen, and I'm gonna adjust the transparency in order to keep as much as the texture as I possibly can. Unfortunately, this is a very manual method of doing it, and it's not what I wanted, but it is what we're gonna have to do with the constraints of this lecture. Taking inspiration from how the textures was placed in the Sims 4 version and including both of them, both the pillow and the wood in one image so that the baking will hopefully go smoothly. Well, I tried various UV map plugins. Eventually, I'm just gonna have to delete those and we're gonna do the UV again. I'm just importing the UV maps I previously made for both the pillow and the chair. So I'm taking the pillow and trying to get as much real estate on that as possible and including it in my UV editing tab. And I'm gonna do the same with the chair. I didn't like the way the chair was originally unwrapped, so I did end up actually re-unwrapping it once again in order to have the best possible fit on this new uh, texture UV map. Just resizing it and moving things around. You can select everything and right click and hit select only overlap in order to find out which parts is overlapping. Now I go back to shading and I'm going to add the image we just made as an image and I'm gonna plug it into base color. And I'm also going to create a new image which is the image that we will bake to. Now this means we will unfortunately lose how pretty it is now. It's going to look a lot flatter, however there is nothing we can do about that. And in order for that to work, we will need to add it as a material and we will need to delete all the other materials so that it will be the one that appears on top. Now that we are finally set up for the baking, we are going to go to the render and that is still the camera icon and we're gonna change the engine from EEVE to cycles and then we're gonna hit bake and we're gonna bake it to diffuse. And this is the result. As you can see, it's a lot more washed out, but we did get a texture on the model. And for the first time we do Blender, that is good enough. Now we're going to go back to texture editing and we're going to save our image so that we can use that texture. Once we have done that, we can go back to the Sims 4 Studio and we go to Object and add 3D, um, new 3D mesh, was it? And then we're gonna hit import mesh and we're gonna import our mesh. I'm missing some footage. But once we have imported the mesh, we can just import the texture as well, if we can find it. And once we have done that, we can hit save and it will save as the package we started on. And we can see how it looks in game by dragging it over to the mods folder. Now, if it imported with the mesh looking like this, it may have the wrong UV map, so you should go back and delete the wrong UV map so you get the corrected version. And as you can see, the pillow here is kind of going through the chair. So if you go back in Blender again and you put on a solidify modifier, we can make the pillow stick out from the chair so it doesn't look as bad. Now hit save and Christian the package, and then we can import it into our mods folder again. And then if we relaunch the game and go back in build mode, we can place our chair and look how it looks in game. Now I had the issue where it was clipping through the floor, so in order to fix that, I was able to place it on the grass, but in order to fix that, I hit the adjust footprint check mark in the Sims 4 Studio, and then I enabled the cheat in the Sims 4, which is bb.moveObjectsOn, which enabled me to place it even though it was overlapping. So this is the final result. Now you guys will have to do this, and you will have to make a scene. So we're gonna do that real quick, and after that it will be your turn. Once we are happy with our staging photo, remember we can press C to take the screenshot and make this guy sit. Now you can do this in Blender for your assignment as well, and if you find it hard, you can do the easier version, which is just the texture editing of the existing object. I wish you the best. Thank you.